The date is June 3, 2025. An unprecedented chill has descended upon relations between the United States and Canada. This is not a meteorological phenomenon, but a diplomatic deep freeze. The world's longest undefended border now feels like a line in the sand. A dispute ignited by trade rhetoric has escalated dramatically. Canada has made a bold, some say provocative move. It is effectively challenging U.S. access to its own state of Alaska. This situation is fraught with tension. It threatens to unravel decades of close partnership and economic interdependence between these two North American neighbors. The core of this escalating crisis lies in a decision made by the Canadian province of British Columbia. BC has taken direct aim at American commercial interests. It plans to impose tolls on U.S. lorries transiting its territory en route to Alaska. The Alaska Highway, a vital artery for goods flowing north, passes directly through British Columbia. For years, this passage has been largely unremarkable, a testament to the amicable relationship. Now, it has become a flashpoint in a rapidly worsening international disagreement. This move by British Columbia was not made in a vacuum. It is a direct response to what many Canadians see as aggressive posturing from south of the border. Specifically, the actions and words of former U.S. President Donald Trump have been cited. The feeling in Ottawa, and indeed across many provincial capitals, is that Canada must stand its ground. The situation remains incredibly fluid, with both nations watching closely to see what the next move will be in this high-stakes geopolitical chess game. The specific legislative weapon being wielded by British Columbia is the Economic Stabilization, Tariff Response Act. This bill was announced in early March 2025 by BC Premier David Eby. He made it clear that this was a defensive measure. The act grants the provincial government the authority to levy tolls. These tolls would target U.S. commercial vehicles using BC's highways and even coastal ferries to reach Alaska. Premier Eby explicitly linked this new legislation to the ongoing trade threats emanating from the United States. The BC government views this new act as a necessary tool. It is designed to provide a swift and proportionate response if such American tariffs were to be reimposed or new ones introduced. The introduction of this bill by Deputy Premier Nikki Sharma sent a clear message. British Columbia was not going to wait passively for potential economic harm. The legislation is structured to be flexible. This allows the BC government to react quickly to any executive orders or trade measures coming from Washington, D.C. The timing of the bill's advancement, slated for after a spring recess in the BC Legislative Assembly, suggested a period for reflection. This provincial action has now become a central piece in a much larger and increasingly bitter international dispute. The decision by British Columbia to prepare for tolls cannot be fully understood without examining the rhetoric from former U.S. President Donald Trump. His pronouncements regarding Canada went far beyond typical trade disagreements. They were, according to BC Premier David Eby, shocking. Reports emerged that Trump had not only threatened severe economic penalties but had also mused about more drastic actions. These included the possibility of military intervention against Canada, a notion almost unthinkable between two such closely allied nations. Even more startling were suggestions that Trump had considered the idea of annexing Canada entirely. Premier Eby voiced these concerns publicly. He accused Trump of harboring ambitions to eliminate the border. He suggested Trump wanted to turn Canada into the 51st U.S. state. Such language, whether intended as serious policy or mere bluster, created a climate of profound distrust and alarm within Canada. These reported threats of annexation and military action, however outlandish they might seem, had a corrosive effect. They transformed a trade dispute into something that felt existential for many Canadians. The rhetoric therefore played a crucial role in escalating the situation. The Canadian response, particularly from British Columbia, was shaped by this perception of a persistent and unpredictable threat from its powerful southern neighbor. Delving deeper into British Columbia's Economic Stabilization, Tariff Response Act, its design reveals a strategic approach to counter-maneuvering. The legislation is not an automatic imposition of fees. Instead, it empowers the provincial government to implement tolls, fees, or other charges on BC's infrastructure. This includes the critical highway networks and coastal ferry systems that U.S. commercial traffic relies upon to reach Alaska. The primary target is clearly the Alaska Highway, a lifeline for goods moving north. A key feature of the act is its flexibility. It was crafted to enable a rapid response. Should the U.S. administration enact detrimental trade policies against Canada, BC can activate these tolls swiftly. This reactive capability is crucial. It means the province doesn't have to go through a lengthy legislative process each time a threat emerges. Interestingly, the Act also has a built-in expiry date, set for May 28, 2027. This sunset clause perhaps offers a window for de-escalation, should relations improve before that date. When the bill was introduced, specific details on how the tolling system would operate were not immediately provided. This lack of explicit detail could be seen as strategic ambiguity. It keeps the U.S. guessing about the potential costs and logistical challenges they might face. The BC government stated that the tolls would only be implemented if U.S. threats continued or materialized into concrete actions. The potential impact is significant. The imposition of tolls would inevitably increase transportation costs. The Act, therefore, is a carefully calibrated economic weapon. Section 5 Canada stands firm, a nationwide wave of retaliation. British Columbia's bold move was not an isolated incident. It appears to be part of a broader, coordinated Canadian response to perceived American economic hostility. Premier Eby didn't just stop at proposing tolls, he also directed the BC government to explore other avenues of retaliation. One significant directive was to cease purchasing American products wherever feasible. This signals a shift towards prioritizing domestic or other international suppliers. Furthermore, in a move with both economic and symbolic weight, BC ordered its provincial liquor stores to halt the sale of alcoholic beverages originating from Republican-led states. Alaska was specifically mentioned in this context. This targeted approach demonstrates a willingness to pinpoint political entities within the U.S. deemed responsible for or supportive of the aggressive trade stance. Premier Eby also committed to working with other Canadian provinces to remove internal trade barriers, aiming to strengthen Canada's domestic economy and reduce its reliance on U.S. trade. The spirit of defiance spread beyond British Columbia. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that the federal government was also preparing retaliatory tariffs. While stating that the ultimate goal was the removal of all tariffs on both sides, the immediate posture was one of readiness to counter any U.S. measures. This federal backing lent significant weight to the provincial actions. In Ontario, Canada's most populous province, Premier Doug Ford announced plans for a hefty 25% surcharge on electricity exported to the United States. The Yukon Territory, which also shares a border with Alaska and relies on the same transit routes through BC, joined the chorus of retaliation. Yukon Premier Ranj Pillai announced several measures. These included instructing government-owned liquor stores to stop buying from American companies. He also moved to limit access for U.S. businesses to government contracts. Yukon residents themselves reportedly suggested even tougher measures, such as their own tolls and potential travel bans. This indicates a groundswell of public support for a firm Canadian stance against American pressure. The message was unambiguous. If the United States pursued aggressive trade tactics, British Columbia would be ready and willing to retaliate. This provincial action has now become a central piece in a much larger and increasingly bitter international dispute. Section 6. The Alaskan Squeeze. Voices of concern from the last frontier. The Canadian retaliatory measures, particularly British Columbia's proposed tolls, have sent shockwaves through Alaska. Officials and business leaders in the northernmost U.S. state are expressing grave concerns. Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy adopted a conciliatory tone. He urged both provincial and state governments to refrain from making unilateral decisions that could escalate the situation. He expressed hope that federal authorities on both sides could find a diplomatic solution. However, the potential impact on Alaska's unique economy is undeniable. Alaska State Senator Robert Myers highlighted the vulnerability of the state's supply chains. Section 7. Collateral damage. The cruise ship industry caught in the crossfire. As tensions flared over potential tolls on U.S. lorries, a new front in the dispute quickly emerged, threatening a different sector entirely: the lucrative cruise ship industry. In response to British Columbia's actions, Republican U.S. Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska did not mince words. He threatened swift economic retaliation directly against British Columbia. His proposed countermeasure targeted a U.S. federal law known as the Passenger Vessel Services Act, or PVSA, a piece of legislation that has long benefited Canadian ports. The PVSA requires foreign-registered cruise ships to make at least one stop in a foreign port when traveling between two U.S. ports. For the popular Alaska cruise circuit, this has meant mandatory stops in British Columbian ports like Vancouver or Victoria. Senator Sullivan proposed waiving this requirement for ships sailing to Alaska. Such a waiver would allow cruise lines to bypass British Columbia entirely. The economic implications for British Columbia would be severe. The cruise industry is a major contributor to British Columbia's tourism economy. It supports thousands of jobs and hundreds of businesses. Losing these port calls would be a devastating blow. Section 8, Economic Tremors, Unpacking the Financial Fallout. The escalating trade dispute between Canada and the United States, sparked by British Columbia's toll proposal and Trump's earlier threats, carries significant economic ramifications for both nations. For Alaska, the most immediate concern is the rising cost of goods. If British Columbia implements tolls on U.S. commercial lorries, transportation expenses for goods heading north will inevitably increase. This will translate to higher prices for consumers on everything from fresh groceries to construction materials. Supply chains, particularly for time-sensitive items, could face serious disruptions. Beyond Alaska, U.S. businesses that rely on exporting goods to or through Canada could also feel the pinch. The broader Canadian retaliation, including Ontario's proposed surcharge on electricity exports and the federal government's readiness to impose tariffs, signals a more challenging trade environment. Furthermore, British Columbia's directive to stop purchasing American products where possible, and similar moves by the Yukon, could lead to lost sales for U.S. companies. For Canada, the economic consequences are also complex. While retaliatory measures are intended to protect Canadian interests, they risk a tit-for-tat escalation that could harm Canadian exporters as well. The U.S. remains Canada's largest trading partner by a significant margin. Any sustained disruption to this relationship could dampen economic growth. Section 9. A Strained Alliance, the Future of U.S.-Canada Relations. This ongoing diplomatic crisis, triggered by Canada's assertive stance against U.S. trade pressures, has cast a long shadow over the future of U.S.-Canada relations. The very foundation of this historically strong alliance, built on shared values, deep economic integration, and mutual security interests, is being tested. The introduction of tolls on U.S. access to Alaska, coupled with threats of military action and annexation, albeit from a former president, has injected an unprecedented level of acrimony into the relationship. Trust, a vital component of any international partnership, has been significantly eroded. The situation has moved beyond mere economic disagreement. It has touched upon fundamental issues of sovereignty and respect. Canada's actions, particularly from British Columbia, demonstrate a newfound willingness to push back forcefully against perceived American overreach. The path forward requires careful diplomacy and a genuine commitment from both sides to de-escalate tensions. Finding common ground will be challenging, especially with the backdrop of such strong rhetoric and retaliatory actions.